Welcome to the 9th Biennial Winter Wildlands Alliance Grassroots Advocacy Conference. This is panel 3. For those of you just joining us or anyone joining us from the audience, if you wouldn't mind, I mean, one of the issues with this virtual format is that we don't get to look out at this sea of friendly faces of people we know and love and want to meet and interact with. So if you wouldn't mind in the chat, just introducing yourself, who you are, who you represent, or who you work with, and then as a prompt, if you could just tell us what you feel are the biggest threat to your favorite backcountry zone. So the biggest threat to your backcountry zone. Think about that. Drop that in the chat. Biennial, so every 2 years. 2 years ago, we were in Boise downtown. 2 years before that, we were up on Donner Summit at Claire Tapan at the old Sierra Club Lodge, which was really fun. We were all piled into a tiny little room talking about public lands. A couple years before that, we were in Golden at the American Alpine Club. We have our eyes on the Pacific Northwest in 2023, I guess it would be, for 2 years. So if anyone has a great idea for a conference venue where we can all, hopefully, we'll be past our current situation and we can all camp out somewhere, pile into some great old lodge and talk about the stuff we care about. But in the meantime, we've got this virtual format, which has its silver linings. It's great that so many people are able to join us from all across the country without having to travel and spend money and burn gas and all that. So, so welcome. I'm David Page. I'm the Advocacy Director at Winter Wildlands Alliance. I'm based in Mammoth Lakes, California, which is Payahunadu, the current and traditional homelands of the Shoshone and Paiute peoples. Winter Wildlands Alliance is based kind of officially as a nonprofit in Boise, Idaho, which is the homeland of the Bannock and Shoshone people. And my policy colleague is based in Bozeman, Montana. So we're kind of spread out. We've been kind of doing this virtual thing for a while, even before it was cool. We are, as I said, based in Boise. We're a national nonprofit. We're an alliance of 32 different grassroots groups across the country, working to educate, inspire, and empower people to take care of their public lands and wild winter landscapes. We have a snow school program that's very robust and dynamic, with about 70 snow school sites across the country, serving about 34,000 generally underserved students, getting them outside on snow, talking about snow science, and having fun in the snow. We have a backcountry film festival that, at least in the former paradigm before COVID, we would tour to about 100 cities and towns across the West, and it is a great gathering point for community to watch some great winter films. Usually as the winter is just getting started. And last year that ended up being mostly a virtual experience. And this year, hopefully will be kind of a hybrid virtual, and some sites hopefully will be able to do, some Mueller festivities outside with heat lamps and bonfires or whatever. I hate to even mention the word fire, given what's going on just to the north of me with these massive fires. But little housekeeping really quickly. Theme of the conference is, can we save the backcountry from ourselves? So, really the emphasis is on what is our personal responsibility in stewarding and taking care of these lands. We are talking about, we have 6 different panels. We've already had 2. They're all being recorded. So if you missed one, if you're just joining us, or if you can't get to one tomorrow, feel free to download those. They'll be on the website. Share those with your colleagues. They're a pretty neat resource. We've gathered some pretty spectacular panelists here, including on this one. We talked this morning about messaging and ethics. We talked about winter travel planning. Tomorrow we'll be talking about funding for land management agencies. We will be talking about ski area expansions. We'll have some athlete influencers talking about the role of social media in establishing land use and recreation ethics. So exciting stuff. Please be sure to join us. Quickly, I wanted to just do a quick public lands acknowledgement statement. Pardon those who've already been with us all morning. This is going to be a repetition, but I think it does bear repeating. When we talk about public lands, I think it's incumbent on us to recognize the long history of these landscapes. People have been living in and recreating on and depending on these landscapes and ecosystems for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years maybe. And in a lot of cases over the last 200-300 years, people have been forcibly removed at gunpoint or killed outright. So violent, tragic history behind the places that we all love. And I think we have to remember that, not just to be morbid and negative, but to take the full responsibility that I think weighs on us as contemporary citizens in a democracy to find ways to participate in processes and take care of these, again, take individual responsibility and also collective responsibility for the management of these places. And, oftentimes, blame gets thrown around, especially when we have huge wildfires. It's the agency's fault, or it's Congress's fault, or it's the visitor's fault, or and I think it's on all of us to figure out a way forward. So that's what we're doing here. And our panel right now will be talking about, we initially titled it Boots on the Ground, but that's kind of militaristic. But the fact of the matter is we do need people on the ground to interact with all of the new visitation that's happening, which generally is a good thing, but we also have all experienced the extraordinary impacts of increased visitation, and there's no better way to reach folks than having people on the ground. So without further ado, let me do a quick lightning round of introductions of our panelists. I'll go ahead and start with you, Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Berry, CEO of the Tahoe Fund. We're based in Lake Tahoe, as our name suggests, and our whole focus is on using philanthropy to improve the Lake Tahoe environment for all to enjoy. And we seem to get very engaged in stewardship and sustainable recreation issues, really trying to get the private community engaged in a way where we can work with our public agency partners to make things better out there for everybody.
Great, thanks, Amy. And Amy, thanks for joining us. I know that you're thick with smoke right now from the Caldor fire and probably from the Dixie fire as well. And I know you're probably trying to escape. So thanks for taking the time to join us. Julie.
Hey everyone, I'm Julie Mach. I'm the Conservation Director for the Colorado Mountain Club based in Salida, Colorado. CMC is focused on recreation and engaging our membership of about 7,500 folks across the state in education and recreation and conservation. And in our department, we really focus on stewardship and advocacy on public lands where we're hiking and climbing and backcountry skiing. Our backcountry snow sports initiative is a really important part of that advocacy work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our Snow Ranger program today.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Kate?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kate Demorest. I work for the United States Forest Service out of the Dillon Ranger District located in Silverthorne, Colorado. My technical job title is Snow Ranger and Resource Specialist. Those resources are pretty far and wide as far as what I cover. But in the wintertime, my job revolves around being the operations lead for the Vail Pass Winter Recreation Area. Pretty unique area to manage. So it'll be fun to talk a little bit more today about that. That's it.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Thanks. And I forgot to mention, those of you who've already been with us know the drill here, but this is going to go pretty quickly. We'll have about a 30-minute, 35-minute discussion that's fairly structured here with the panel, and then we'll try to open it up for a good 15 minutes worth of Q&A. Melinda Quick, who is our events director, will jump on at that point and field questions and feed those to our panelists. So I can understand just in advance, I understand your frustration that we may not finish or get through all the thoughts that are put forward here today, but that's in some ways part of the point. And definitely feel free to follow up with us afterward, and we can help facilitate getting questions to panelists or connecting you with panelists moving forward. So to get us going, I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Julie. If you could just talk to us a little bit more about what sort of conditions you were facing on the ground or continue to face on the ground, and what precipitated the idea of getting involved in a snow ranger program? And then we'll move forward later into kind of how snow rangers work and the structural details of it.
Yeah, definitely. So Colorado, like most other mountain states, we're just seeing just such a huge increase in recreation summer, but particularly in winter. It's been growing the last, I'd say 10 years for sure, and been really acute in the last 5 years as far as just the increase in number of backcountry skiers, snowmobilers, kind of everyone getting outside in the winter. When COVID hit, the increase just ballooned even more, right? With folks coming from the resorts and just jumping into making that transition into the backcountry. And we had been having conversations with the Forest Service about winter travel planning and different ways to manage winter recreation. We actually host a hut trip every year as part of our Backcountry Snow Sports Initiative, where we're bringing in the Forest Service and other partners to talk about these issues. And that's where the idea of the Snow Ranger program really came from. And our partner down on the Ouray, the Uncompahgre National Forest and the Ouray Ranger District came to us and said, hey, we want to start the Snow Ranger program. Red Mountain Pass, which many of you may be familiar with, is a really high use area. We're seeing more conflict. We're dealing with parking issues. We're dealing with new users who just aren't well educated about the avalanche conditions. And we want to get some folks out there on the ground. The agency, being pretty short-staffed, didn't have seasonal staff that they could put out on the ground, and so they partnered with CMC to put a snow ranger program together. We started in the 2019-2020 winter with a 2-person team, and then last winter was our second year of the program. We are looking at expanding now to have a couple of teams running on that forest, and looking at other areas in Colorado where, again, that we've got a high intensity of backcountry use that would benefit from having a presence of snow rangers on the ground, able to talk to folks and help educate the public.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'll kick it over to you, Amy. Same question. If you could just talk to us about what's going on the ground and what you were facing and how you guys rallied. I know you're coming from a little bit different vantage than Julie's program, but explain to us what you're up to.
Sure. Well, I mean, just like Julie was saying, Tahoe experienced unprecedented visitation during COVID, actually more than we are even seeing this summer. Everything was closed. You couldn't go to your local park in California, but you could drive up to Tahoe for the day. So everybody was just feeling incredibly overwhelmed last year. We ended up getting together a pretty well coordinated group of land managers and recreation folks and NGOs, and just kind of started to put our heads together to think about what are some solutions to help manage this overflow of people, while at the same time the resources at the land managers significantly reduced. COVID made it almost impossible to hire new people. Unemployment is an interesting thing right now. It doesn't seem like anybody can hire employees to go work. So Tahoe Fund is really a grant making organization, at the core of what we do. And we had 4 different organizations come to us this winter with very similar ideas, and that was to get boots on the ground, to put people out at high use recreation sites. And they came to us to ask for funding, and we were able to coordinate everybody through a program that we're the fiscal sponsor for called Take Care Tahoe, which is really a collaborative of 50 plus organizations in the basin, actually the whole region, that work together on environmental stewardship and messaging. And so our board said, these are all great programs. We don't want to see 4 different programs. Everybody comes to one Tahoe. Can we get everybody together? And so in about 2 or 3 weeks, we were able to get the Room Trail Association and the Lake Tahoe Unified School District, working with Sierra Nevada Alliance, got junior rangers out there, worked with some of the resort associations to get rangers out there, the Bike Coalition, and then the town of Truckee as well. And what we agreed was that we didn't have time to create one huge monster program, was that we just wanted it to look the same no matter where people went in the Tahoe region. So we funded the branding. So everybody was in Take Care Tahoe ambassador uniforms. We had over 75 ambassadors out in the field this summer. And as I said, they were at trailheads, they were at busy beaches, They all had consistent messaging. They looked really adorable. I don't know if we can put a picture of these junior rangers in the chat, but we tried to make them as friendly looking as absolutely possible because we didn't want them to have any sort of enforcement piece to them. We didn't want to create more conflict than we're already seeing out on these busy trails. And so their intention of them was just to be incredibly helpful, to help answer questions, to hand out dog poop bags, to remind people to keep their dogs on a leash, to remind people no fires. We went into it with a very much, let's just see how it goes. We called it a pilot project, which I think can be really helpful because couched under a pilot means that there's room for change and improvement and growth. And so we got together every 2 weeks, talked about how things were going with everybody. And then, people were making adjustments on the fly throughout the whole season. And you can see in the Zoom, we had the 25th annual Tahoe Summit last Thursday. We had a number of senators and governors with us, and the Secretary of the Interior and 12 of the junior rangers, so high school kids from South Lake Tahoe High School that were paid to be ambassadors this summer, were able to be honored with certificates that were signed by the 3 senators, and they were brought up on stage. So it's kind of exciting and nice to see a spotlight get put on these kids for working so hard to help take care of Tahoe.
That's awesome. What a great program.
And you can see their, I'll say it here, kind of dorky uniforms, but we love them because they're just so inviting and friendly.
Nice. So I'll kick it over to you, Kate. From an agency standpoint, from the Forest Service line officer standpoint, what have you been seeing on the ground over the last couple of years, and what have been your challenges in trying to manage recreation?
Yeah, good question. I think a lot of the similarities that Julie and Amy have mentioned, just a lot of use issues. For those of you who don't know, Vail Pass Winter Recreation Area is it's about a 55,000 acre area that we as the Forest Service manage in collaboration with a citizens group called the Vail Pass Task Force. So they help us with some of our management decisions and oversight on what we do, which is great. It's a huge area, and we have a lot of different backcountry users that utilize the trails and the mountains up there. We have over 50 miles of groomed trails, another 60 to that for non-motorized trails. And we run a staff of, last year was our largest year. We had 11 rangers, including myself. And part of that was funded through the Rocky Mountain Youth Corps. And we've sort of based our operations right there at Vail Pass. But we have another 4 trailheads in our management program, as well as outfitter guide use, a couple of backcountry huts. We have 6 included, and then a number of different permittees who, run classes in snow science or teach people survival skills or just guide ski or snowshoe tours. So we have this pretty complex program at our fingertips, and it hasn't changed in the sense of we haven't had really any different problems. We've been on track to double our usage over the last 4 years with visitation. We know that being within an hour drive of the Front Range of Colorado, where most of our population resides, also makes it pretty busy for us. And then, with the pandemic hitting, I think a lot of people were just looking for better opportunities to get themselves outside, just do something outside of their home. So backcountry ski sales went through the roof. You couldn't buy a snowmobile last summer. You still can't buy a snowmobile this summer. So that's not changed. And then, I think with a lot of these places, it's that kind of age-old issue of, we think of it as the motorized versus the non-motorized, or just really it's incompatible uses, So for us as our focus being on sustainable multiple use, managing and balancing these different special interest groups is always going to be a challenge. So, what we're relying on is that partnership aspect with different voices for the different recreationists out there, and and hopefully that we can remain dynamic enough to address these issues as they come and not take too long of a time to figure all this out. But I think, and then another thing that we've been noticing too is just from a safety standpoint, we're in pretty extreme terrain up at Vail Pass, and in a lot of these areas, there's avalanche danger, there's crowding, there's all sorts of other basic things, but a lot of people are coming up and going into the backcountry without use. They don't know how to use a beacon. They don't know how to use their probe and shovel. They're not sure what they should be looking for in terrain selection, or how, you know, they should be behaving in a way that's safe for them and their group, and then the other people that are around them. So for us, there's a safety aspect, which I think ties into an etiquette aspect. And I know that's been on the minds of a lot of different managers, is how do we teach this newer group of people that are recreating in the backcountry? How do we teach them to be good stewards, and how to, you know, interact with one another on the trail, whether it's a recreational snowcatter or a kite flyer, cross-country skier, you know, timber sled rider. There's, you know, there's a host of different people that we really want to get that outreach piece to. And so it's going to be one of our, I think, our bigger challenges moving forward. But, you know, I guess that's kind of the nutshell version of Bill Pass and the issues that we're seeing. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and on that etiquette front, if you get a chance, check out the panel that we had this morning. We had a really great discussion with folks from Leave No Trace and Recreate Responsibly, and pretty interesting, you know, communal, collective, collaborative efforts to try to come up with new ways of pitching and etiquette of land use. You talked about the task force, you know, having citizens kind of in an advisory capacity up there, and we often refer to that. We sort of look up to you guys as the adults in winter recreation management, just because you've been at it for a long time. But do you have volunteers on the ground as well, or is it mostly uniformed line officers out there?
Yeah, it's mostly uniform. You know, in the past we've had volunteer Forest Service folks help out, and you know what we're trying to do is partner with. We have a friends group for our district called the Friends of the Dillon Ranger District, and they also help us out a lot with our summer programming. So we've been in talks to try and figure out how we could expand a volunteer program for Vail Pass, but then also some of the, you know, the other overused trailheads that we have on our district. So we've been exploring it, but we haven't developed it fully. So
I think you should probably talk to our friend Julie Mach about that. So Julie, tell us, you know, you started really with a pilot program, and it's grown and become, it seems, sustainable, and hopefully will grow in future years. Can you talk to us just a little bit about the kind of the brass tacks, the structure of it? How's it funded? You know, we're talking about Forest Service employees, I think, right? And not volunteers.
Not volunteers, but these are actually CMC employees. So our partnership with the Forest Service is a really close one. They're working with agency recreation staff, but the snow rangers themselves are CMC employees. And part of the reason we do that is, like as Amy mentioned, the agencies are just having a harder time hiring people and being able to kind of get seasonal folks on board quickly enough. So yeah, so you know, we're working with the agencies. We do receive some funding from the district themselves, but we've been able to kind of tie that together with both corporate dollars as well as grant funding to extend the season. Our goal is to have the snow rangers on the ground at least 4 months out of the year. You know, even 5 months would be ideal to have a little bit of prep time at the beginning of the season, but right now they're on pretty much beginning of January into April as the spring ski season in the San Juans is kind of the prime time for them to be out there. But yeah, so, you know, again, a combination of different types of funding is what's allowed this to sort of be sustainable. You know, we're hopefully easing the burden on the agency to get money together for this kind of program, and then leveraging those other funding sources. Having the corporate partners come in and support with gear that the snow rangers are using, whether it's, you know, float packs and skis and split boards and that sort of thing, has been really really key to make sure they've got the right safety equipment and things they need to do their job. But then the Forest Service is providing snowmobiles and trucks and some of that bigger equipment as well. So it's a really close partnership, and probably wouldn't work if any one of those pieces were to fall out. So
great. Well, we're sure hoping from a national perspective that it's scalable and that we can start to replicate that program in other areas where it's needed. Maybe in Tahoe, Amy, maybe we can we can circle back later and see if we can expand your programs into winter.
Yeah, there's been discussion about it already, for sure. We had a great conversation with the folks at Mammoth. Mammoth Trails has done a really good job on their Trail Ambassador program. And something they said to our team, which really struck me and stuck with me, is, you can build the right infrastructure, but it takes time and money. Putting people out to talk to people is immediate and not too expensive. And so I think there's a lot of power in that, for sure.
Yeah. So while you're on, maybe you can talk to us just a little bit about the sort of structure of your, I mean, you mentioned that you've got 4 different programs. Maybe you can talk, and I know that your interaction with the Forest Service probably is a little more limited because you're dealing mostly in the basin with state parks, but if you could talk just about your partnerships with
agencies. Actually, 80% of the land in Tahoe is Forest Service land, actually. So yeah, we have a smorgasbord of jurisdictions around here, which makes things really interesting. It was set up, the structure was set up a little bit different for each organization, which I think was important because it gave people the flexibility they needed to make it happen. I think probably the program that should be replicated really everywhere is what they did through Sierra Nevada Alliance and the Lake Tahoe Unified School District. So they targeted kids, high school kids, mostly bilingual, because we have a fairly large bilingual visitor population. And they paid them above minimum wage to go and work for the summer at these high rec use sites. And they really looked at it as not just, training these kids to be out in public facing, but the city of South Lake Tahoe was a major funder of it as well, because they looked at it as career development and also community relations. So while we don't want the ambassadors to have to play an enforcement role, they did have radios and they did have the ability to contact law enforcement if necessary. So there's kind of this neat relationship development going on between the youth in town and then the police force in town. And then for Parks and Rec, if you get these kids out there for the summer and they're standing at a beach or a park or trail, kind of interests them in Park and Rec, then it sort of opens the door as we have jobs for them at Park and Rec locations or the Forest Service. It's kind of a career development, which is, I think, really neat. So it's giving them money, which they need. Everybody needs a good summer job, and then giving them experience that will hopefully translate into good career opportunities. So for the junior rangers, that's the kind of program we'd like to see expanded. Really, it's in South Lake for the summer. We're already talking about bringing it to North Lake for next summer, and that's the kind of program that would be amazing to see expanded and maybe funded through some of the Recovery Act funding and the new federal transportation plan, or federal tourism recovery plan or bill. The Rim Trail, they went the volunteer route. And they have an amazing group of dedicated volunteers. For those of you who don't know, the Tahoe Rim Trail goes all the way around the Lake Tahoe basin up high. I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it's over 150 miles of trail. It's in partnership with the Forest Service and state parks. And so they just highlighted a few areas where they were just seeing a lot of people coming out and a lot of user issues. And put people out there. The Bike Coalition, June is Bike Month. So they targeted really high population trails for the month of June. And they put a tent out there. And not only did they educate people, they had a map to hand out. They had bells and lights. And it was not just about helping answer people's questions and improving the environment. It was really about bike safety in general. So they were able to get that messaging out for the month. And in Tahoe right now, we're looking to use some of the tourism recovery funding to get an outreach coordinator for the region that would then kind of help build out this ambassador program across multiple jurisdictions for next summer and maybe in the winter too.
Very cool. Super cool. So Amy, you've talked about training and some of the sort of coordination between different groups. I want to kick it back to you, Kate, to talk about from an agency standpoint. One of the things that we've just kind of dealt with at arm's length here in Mammoth Lakes is we've got, there are a couple different organizations with different stewardship and different sort of trail host ambassador programs. And sometimes I think from a visitor standpoint, it's hard to distinguish between those folks and the people who actually work for the agency, and where the lines get kind of blurred between enforcement and education. And I think on the whole, I think people are really receptive to just having someone on the ground where they can ask questions and get answers. But there certainly are some who feel, a little taken aback when somebody says, hey, do you have your backcountry permit? And it's like, well, who are you? And what is that vest that you're wearing? And, Amy talked about uniforms. Obviously, the difference between Forest Service units is opaque to most visitors, but so what, from an agency standpoint and from the perspective of the Vail Pass, do you see as the challenges and opportunities there in terms of coordinating between different groups?
I think on the bigger scale, it's the communication piece. What are our needs within the area? And kind of have to figure out what we can provide as an agency, what we have the resources for. And then we can start talking to our partner groups for maybe what we need to either join forces on or have them, work with us. So like, for example, we used to only take cash and checks for the day's fee that's required to pay, or that you need to pay to get into the area. And so we worked with our Vail Pass Task Force, our citizens group, to have them help us figure out how to get an automated fee machine, something that we could, provide better services to the public, and then something that would also allow us to not staff the booth at the entrance as much and put those rangers out in the field. So there's opportunities like that, or we partner with the Colorado Avalanche Information Center to make awareness posters, put stuff up at trailheads that might catch people's eye and help them figure out that safety message. And we partnered with National Forest Foundation and Weston Snowboards, Backcountry Access. We put in some beacon checkers at the pass, and these are things that as a sole agency, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish, but because we could partner with these different groups and find these areas that they could help us in, we could take advantage of one another and provide a better, safer opportunity for our publics. And then, that's like on the bigger, broader partnership standpoint, but from a operations point, there's a lot of value in having our agency staff out there because of the training requirements for some of these winter areas, whether it's avalanche education, how to ride a snowmobile safely, how to drive a truck, how to use four-wheel drive, how to use trailers. How do you contact the public? We have trainings specifically for all these things. So, when I hire on our new rangers, there's about 6 to 8 weeks worth of training every season just to make sure that folks are well versed in this stuff. And then for us, being forest protection officers, we have to really know the letter of the law and what we can and can't enforce and what's reasonable and what's not. So that's where we like to have our staff and our personnel on the ground, because we know how to do that portion of things. Where we'd like to expand our volunteer partnerships would be in the education component. Like you said, David, seeing people on the ground is really valuable. Whether it's an identifier like us with our badges and name tags and the Forest Service insignia, or it's a volunteer group, with their own kind of distinct uniforms. At least it's someone to see out in the field that you can talk to or ask questions of.
Yeah, that's great. Do you feel like there's more discussion at the agency level, either regionally or above, in Forest Service leadership to really to expand those volunteer programs, or to try to find ways to do that, and what are the challenges to expanding and moving these volunteer programs out across the landscape, across the whole system?
Yeah, different forests are having different luck with these. It comes down to that communication and the engagement piece, who's willing to come to the table and help you. We've had trailhead ambassador programs with some success. We have a really great wilderness group who does volunteer, wilderness patrols, some of our shared wilderness areas, which is great. The big thing, I think, with Vail Pass is, how can you make sure that those volunteers can stay safe, or what can we ask of them to do for us? And really, it's just kind of defining that and defining the liability that some of these groups are going to be willing to are able to take on. You know, for when Doozy and I from FDRD were trying to work out a volunteer winter ranger program, it just gets really complex with what we can ask people to do, or finding out the comfort level for people. If we have check-in and check-out procedures, do we have all the right equipment to give people? Do people ski and ride? Could they hurt their ACL? You know, unfortunately, sometimes when we look at these things, we get into the weeds when it comes to those details, but those are the details that are really, really important to have ironed out. So,
Great. So one more question kind of on this regional or broader coordination front. I'm going to give it to you, Julie, first, but Amy or Kate, if you want to weigh in on this before we open up for Q&A, then certainly feel free. But Julie, I want to give you a chance to talk about data collection. It's something that, you know, we've struggled with here in Region 5, you know, trying to just, for starters, figure out how many people are actually out there, what are they doing, what different modes of recreation are we actually facing, so that we're not just operating, you know, from the gut or based on anecdote. But, you know, we do a kind of data collection here in Mammoth where, you know, basically we've created our own applications, and, you know, having the agency then, you know, it makes it hard for everybody to coordinate. So maybe if you want to talk about the RIMS app and sort of a future vision for region-wide and maybe nationwide data collection around this stuff, that'd be great.
Yeah. You know, I think probably in most areas, part of the nature of backcountry skiing and sort of that dispersed recreation is it is dispersed, right? And it's harder to catch people. You have your main maybe parking areas and things, but people aren't necessarily all entering through the same trailhead or passing the trail counter that where it's, you know, easy to kind of to collect that information. So yeah, we hear it from the agencies and from other partner groups is they really don't have good metrics on how many folks are going into the backcountry, where they're going, where kind of, you know, the high priority either ski or snowmobile areas might be. And so we created the RIMS app partially to solve that problem and some other problems related to just collecting trails data and things, but basically it's a mobile app where you can, as a user, as a snow ranger, as an agency staff person, submit data on visitor use, and you drop a pin with a GPS coordinate. You've got a date and time stamp, and you can record how many people you're seeing, what type of use, whether they're skiing, snowmobiling, hiking, mountain biking, whatever it might be. You can do parking lot counts and, you know, kind of capture how many folks are in different areas at different times of the day, at different seasons, different days of the week. And so we're having our snow rangers use that program pretty intensively this year, and got, you know, for the first time, I think, really comprehensive data to back up some of that anecdotal evidence that use is increasing, and that we've got, you know, seasonal trends that, you know, February is really kind of the peak of seasonal use up there. And to be able to demonstrate that and show the changing use over the course of the winter season was really cool to be able to do. And so our hope is, again, this is an app that's free and available for the public to use, that we can have your general recreationist helping to collect this information, and then we're able to provide that back to the agency, and it can be used across jurisdictional boundaries, which is super helpful. Again, we've seen apps that the Forest Service puts out, or that a specific geographic area might be using. And, you know, but you can't use it, you know, at Red Mountain Pass and at Vail Pass, right? And RIMS hopefully can use everywhere. You can use it outside of Colorado. And then again, we can aggregate that data at a really local scale, right? Just at Red Mountain Pass, and look at one parking area and the issues we're seeing there, or we can look at it across an entire district, an entire forest, or an entire state. So that's a little bit of a snapshot on the RIMS program. I'll drop a link into the chat if folks want to learn a little bit more about that, and I'll try to answer any of the questions that might be coming up in the chat too.
Awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
We didn't know about the RIMS app, so we didn't know really what to do. So we have something called the Tahoe Citizen Science app that a bunch of NGOs built just to have citizen science, you know, tracking different things that are happening, like clarity and aquatic invasive species and things. And we were able to sort of wedge it in to fit for our needs, so that all of the ambassadors out in the field could use that app with a passcode to get in, and they're logging all of their interactions, similar to what you were saying. But boy, I wish we had this webinar 3 months ago. We could have saved us a lot of work. So
Well,
thanks for sharing that. We'll look into it for sure.
that's why we're doing it now, because it's certainly something we run into in advocacy all the time, where it's, there are just so many different programs and the data is coming from so many sources, and what's legit and what's not. It would be really great to have a nationwide program that everybody's using. Kate, what are you guys doing in terms of data collection?
We collect visitation numbers. We're not using any sort of app like RIMS, like Julie's been talking about. We just kind of use our own metrics.
Okay, great. Well, all kinds of fascinating stuff here. We're at 20 minutes to the hour, or 19, which is good. It gives us a good little window here. I think a lot of questions are starting to come in via the chat and the Q&A. I want to bring Melinda in, our events director, to field some of those questions and feed some questions, further questions for discussion to the panel.
Yeah, thanks everybody for a really great conversation so far. I just kind of want to cover a few questions that have come up, but that have been answered in the chat. But just want to make sure everybody has access to those answers. Kelly asked, as a seasonal wilderness ranger with backcountry skiing experience, she is always looking for meaningful winter jobs. When and where are these winter ranger jobs posted?
Kelly, you can email me if you're interested this year. We usually starting sometime in October, we'll post our jobs through kind of conservation job boards and sort of the general outdoor jobs. We're not posting through USA Jobs because we're not a federal agency. So we're using kind of the nonprofit outlets, and then we try to get it out, to our partners and networks. Yeah, I'd love to have you.
Great, thanks, Julie. And I know you just answered Aaron in the chat, but I wanted to make sure everybody saw that answer too. Aaron asks, can you speak to integrating data between TrafX counters and RIMS in the RIMS app?
Yeah, and I can expand a little bit. So TrafX counters are the trail counters that a lot of agencies and nonprofit groups are using to use kind of infrared counting of visitor use. We have a back-end dashboard kind of analytics platform where we analyze all of the RIMS data, and we can actually pull other data sources into that. So we would take an entire Excel spreadsheet of TrafX data, and we could import that in on the back end. It wouldn't necessarily show up in RIMS just because the way that the data is structured, but yeah, we can pull that in for comparison, as well as other monitoring work or inventory work that the agencies or other groups might be doing.
Great, thank you. At this time, we don't have any other questions that have come in, so feel free to drop them in the chat. Oh, and it looks like one just came in from Lonnie, so it's perfect timing. Lonnie says, Kate, can you explain further how the Forest Service collects visitation data? What metrics do y'all use?
Yeah, so we charge a day use fee for visitors entering the rec area, so we can count basically how many tickets we sell. So we sell day use passes through fee envelopes that visitors can self-register at 4 of our different trailheads, and actually at the 5th too, but our 5th trailhead being at Vail Pass has the automated fee machine. So that machine has the capability to compile data for example, how many day use passes were sold in a given period of time, how many season passes were issued, for example. So at the end of the year, I can contact that company and get that data in an Excel spreadsheet, and we could make, pivot tables. We can figure out, what sort of information we might want to gather, for example, like how many season pass holders are visiting versus how many days passes were sold. Does visitation increase with, say, spring break or President's Weekend? Those kind of numbers help us also understand when we should be staffing and where we should be staffing within the area too. People can register which trailhead they originated from. They can also identify what kind of equipment they're utilizing that day, and then what kind of their intended purposes too. So people can say they're a skier, they're a snowmobiler, they're a hybrid user, for example. So those are really kind of what we gather. And then that also helps us to ask for funding for, increased ranger positions or maybe it'll tell us more about what we need to do for grooming or for plowing or other access issues. So hopefully that wasn't too long of an answer, but it explains a little bit of, I think sometimes people get a little squeamish and they're like, what's the federal government, gathering about me? And it's like, well, we just want to know how we can better, manage this area. So.
And the flip side of it, again, from an advocacy standpoint, when we look at national visitor use monitoring data that comes out every year, sometimes it feels like, wait, they've missed us. They're not counting us. They're not counting me. I don't know if I don't want to put you on the spot, but you can speak to it sort of from a federal agency standpoint. How are those numbers collected and how is that used, not just from a discrete winter recreation area standpoint, but broadly in the agency to really figure out what are those use trends, and do you feel like it's adequate from within the agency, or do you guys need help? Or
I don't think I'm a good person to speak to that. I can speak to the disciplines that I work in and the disciplines that I manage, but I can't be the spokesperson for the whole agency on that one.
Of course,
it's too dynamic. Yeah. So I can tell you about Vail Pass. I can tell you about developed and dispersed camping, because that's what I do in the summers. But outside of that, no. It's tricky. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And I think that's kind of the takeaway talking with Amy and Julie and me is, all three of us run different types of programming, and we all have different ways of figuring out how we can quantify that and show that data. So I don't know if there's a universal method. I think Julie's probably the closest there is to it, which is great. So yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll try and figure out what we can do, either adopting other things or just keep doing what we're doing.
Yep, great.
There is a follow-up question to that as well. And then we have one other question after that. But again, for Kate, how do you extrapolate that? I believe the data is what they're referring to include folks who don't pay or don't enter through portals with pay stations.
Well, we can't count what we don't see, I suppose. Vail Pass is, you kind of have to enter through one of the portals. We have a general idea of plus or minus how many people might be out there. We do put up traffic counters. We've had link studies in the areas before, for example, where visitors were counted more for that study than they were just for our general visitor use numbers. And then we also rely on the self-reporting of different outfitter and guides. Like I mentioned earlier, we do have groups that take people up to take their pro level 1 or their rec level 1. So those instructors identify how many people were up there each day, and then they give us that number at the end of the season. For those of you in special uses permitting, that's your client or your user days. Yeah, if you can find a way to count people that are invisible, that'd be great.
We struggle with this. We struggle with this in Tahoe as well, because we don't have gates and there's no entrance fees anywhere. And I know the public agencies have used a number of different tools. There's something called streetlight data you can get. It's basically Bluetooth that pings off of sensors. So you can start to count people based on how many different cell phone pings you get in an area. And they can do heat maps, which is pretty interesting. So, we'll build new trails in Tahoe and you'll see the heat map just lights up, in high use rec sites throughout the year. And we have winter data and summer data. But still, we had a call with all the rec managers and NGOs, and everybody sort of had to agree that 15 million users was the right number because we have so much data that shows so many different data points. It's really hard to get our hands around it. So there's a whole initiative in the Tahoe Basin just on metrics and just on collecting user data. It's really tricky.
Yeah, and something to think about too. I know we talk a lot about data, but a good question I'd like to ask too is, what's the point of this data? So, gathering data for the sake of gathering data, I think some of us can get kind of wrapped up in that. So I think from the public land management agency and interacting with so many people, we have to be careful on what we're gathering and if we're actually going to use that data, and I think that also speaks to some of the privacy that people have too. Not a lot of people want to provide you with deep valued answers to these questions if it's not going to go towards something. So I feel like if we're going to be asking people for these different things or what they're doing out there, we should have a good answer for them on how we're going to use that data, what it's going to go towards, and be really transparent about it. So I think I'm really sensitive to it being a federal land manager, you know, and all that I do being transparent. So yeah, that data management question is, it can get tricky. We could go down a rabbit hole, I'm sure, for hours on this one.
Yeah.
And I'll just to add to that, I think one of the values of the data that we've seen is just in demonstrating the need, right? Because again, we can hear anecdotally that there's a lot of people out there, that the agencies don't have staff to deal with the conflict issues, whatever it might be, but to be able to actually have those numbers and take it to the district ranger, to the forest supervisors, or to the corporate sponsors who are going to fund this and say, hey, our folks talked to 700 people and they were only out there for part of the season, right? Like having those numbers has been helpful for that, for sure.
Yeah, that's great, Julie. You know, my rangers do a daily log. You know, we compile, you know, what we see out in the field, whether it's, you know, people providing services illegally without a permit on the forest, if there's outfitter guides showing up when they're not supposed to be up there, or, you know, people harassing skiers on snowmobiles, or, you know, someone throwing their hiking poles at a snowmobiler. Like we kind of collect all this data too, and that helps us present our case to our partners for where we need help. You know, maybe it's the education component or the etiquette component. And then if it's more the serious law enforcement, we'll call CPW or try and get out to the areas where people are being nuisances. So, yeah.
Nice, good. Okay, one more question, Melinda.
Yeah, we have one from Dan. He's wondering, where does the funding for the Snow Rangers and Tahoe ambassadors come from? Do agency agreements help cover this, or is it private grant funding, et cetera?
Sounds like that's for you, Amy.
Well, for Tahoe ambassadors, it came from, Tahoe Fund, which is private donations from our private donors. And then for the junior rangers, Tahoe Fund was just one of the funders into that program. And that also included the El Dorado Community Foundation, the City of South Lake Tahoe, the Lake Tahoe Visitors Authority. They're responsible for driving tourism into the basin. I know I'm going to forget a couple other funders, but it was sort of a combination of folks to put it together. I think for next year, we're looking at some federal grants to really expand the program. And I'm sure there'll be a share of private funding that goes along with it to help secure those federal funds.
Great, thanks. Julie, do you want to say anything about funding, or do you want to make a pitch for donations?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, again, just, you know, right now we're relying on a kind of a conglomerate of funding from the agencies, about 50%. They covered about 50% of the program last year, but then really relying pretty heavily on local foundation, the Telluride Foundation, and then some of our corporate sponsors, Athletic Brewing, Black Diamond, and Weston were our primary sponsors. Winter Wildlands also chipped in last year, which was huge. Just, you know, there are a lot of costs associated with not only the, you know, staffing and just paying people, but the training, the equipment costs, and making sure they're, you know, they've got the resources they need to be successful.
And members too, right? Members of Colorado Mountain Club, members of Winter Wildlands Alliance,
Yep.
Join us. We need your membership. We need your participation. So Melinda, if there's not anything else, we'll wrap it up. Great. Well, thank you all for your time. Terrific discussion and hopefully ongoing. Certainly one of the silver linings in this Zoom thing is we establish these relationships across regions that we didn't necessarily have, and they can be really impactful on the ground. So really thank you guys for the work you're doing, and thanks for joining us today. And thanks to the audience for taking the time to listen to this. Melinda will be following up with a survey and some resources. And again, check back in on the website. We'll have the recording for this session and the other sessions, which we hope you will share widely. That's it. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.